thank you all for coming here. I'm really excited to talk with Greg Foster tonight and learn more about Graphite, all the technical challenges we're facing, how they've grown such a strong engineering team, and the rest of the company as well. For those that don't know, I'm Marcos. I lead engineering at Statsig. Statsig was founded 3.5 years ago, almost 4. We are building a world-class feature flagging, experimentation, analytics platform, completely end-to-end, inspired by the internal tools used at Facebook, which enables developers to constantly launch new features and experiment on pretty much everything people do there. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one, thank you for having me. Love it. Statsig is an amazing company. We've been using it for a while. We thought about building our own internal feature flag system, but luckily you existed and we were able to adopt you. We've been using Statsig for like 3 years, ever since we started. Graphite was founded nearly 5 years ago, right around the same time. Started the pandemic. Similar, we were stealing good ideas out of Facebook and trying to compete with everyone else. So very similar style companies.
Adapting.
Yeah, good ideas are adapted. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm Greg. I'm one of the co-founders. I lead engineering here at Graphite.
Woo! Awesome. And we're also Graphite users. We're a very Facebook-heavy engineering team. When we left, we all really missed Fabricator, Stackdiff, all that stuff. So it was nice to find Graphite. So first question, it's pretty normal, building repositories, committing code. Seems very simple, top level. I think it's actually extremely complicated where, Facebook, I know, had a bunch of things where they had to basically do their own special things for dealing with Mercurial. They couldn't actually keep up with all the number of commits all the developers were doing. Yeah. Can you go into the detail of what are some interesting technical challenges you guys have faced building Graphite?
Yeah, absolutely. Technical challenges we faced while building Graphite. I mean, it's funny you talk about Facebook and Mercurial. I just think as a tangent immediately, it's one of the most interesting stories of why Facebook didn't just use Git. Because Git already existed while Facebook was, in the early days, was on Git, but they ran into scaling issues. Right. Their repository got too large, Git couldn't handle it. They went to the Git maintainers and said, hey, can we extend Git? It's an open source thing. Can we just update and extend this to handle bigger repositories, bigger numbers of files? I think it was slowing down their system. It was taking minutes to do single commits. And the Git maintainer said, no, your repos are too big. Stop doing this. Repos should be small. Mercurial was much more friendly, and they said, yeah, sure, feel free to extend the backend system, and we'll handle bigger repos. So it's just it's a fun artifact of history. But bigger question is what does Graphite do to handle commits and larger repositories?
Yeah, exactly. I guess a bunch of different challenges of huge files, huge number of commits. I'm sure people have used the system of having bots that will land code every single minute.
Yeah, it's really true. So on one level, we get to sidestep this problem a little bit because we try to not store user source code. Instead, we try to proxy it through GitHub, which is actually kind of cool. No one before Graphite, to my knowledge, has ever created a code collaboration system, a place to review, create, merge code changes that syncs to a different code storage. Everything that's ever existed is like Garrett, Fabricator, Bitbucket, GitLab, GitHub. They've all said, hey, you got to store your source code here, and then you got to collaborate on top of our UI. At best, they could do kind of a Git mirroring system, but no one really created a decoupled interface. So at Graphite, we believed that the only way we could kind of iterate on top of GitHub and Git was to first make something that was compatible with where people were at. So we said, okay, we'll build a syncing engine. So when you talk about how do we deal with really large files, how do we deal with thousands of commits a second? On one level, we sidestep part of this because GitHub has to deal with it. People are still pushing their Git remotes are still GitHub. They're still pushing all those files to GitHub. But we have to deal with a secondary effect of this, which is a really hard challenge of roughly mirroring GitHub's entire data set for all of our users, including every commit hash, including every comment, every status check, every user, every avatar. And we are able to sync them to Graphite systems within about 2 seconds latency. We avoid the source code, and instead we proxy that and we load that in real time. But that creates its own headache because the amount of source code files that we're even just fetching and loading in real time makes us look like a DDoS attacker at GitHub. We've tried to shard out our IPs as much as possible, but there's limits on it from AWS's perspective of how much they'll let you do that. So it's kind of this back and forth where we're playing a lot of games with GitHub to proxy that high volume of data without getting rate limited, and while still providing a good user experience. Eventually, I think we're just going to have to store the source code, and we're going to have to deal with some of these problems firsthand. But we've tried to avoid it until now.
That makes sense. Have there been any surprising challenges that you face? Like any edge cases that you didn't really expect when you started building the system?
Million? Yeah. Okay. There's so many. One of the classic ones is there's so many different ways that developers want to do Git. Git is a little bit too unopinionated, and I think large companies have started forming strong companies. They said, we should probably have a single trunk. We should probably have branches that live off that trunk. We should probably follow a rebase workflow. We should probably squash those pull requests into a single commit and then merge those commits onto trunk. More and more, there's I think somewhat of a standard opinion being formed, but it's not standard enough. And the edge cases are extreme. People love doing the most wild and crazy things. They love just creating 7 trunk branches. They love. We see some users creating 200 high stacks, where they're starting to create stacks of pull requests that are essentially long-lived feature branches. We see people who love doing weird things with empty commits. I didn't even know empty commits were possible before working on Graphite. You can totally have commits with no files in them. So yeah, people do all sorts of chaotic stuff. What's really fun, the nice part about Graphite is when people do crazy stuff, we see it breaks, and we just go message to those users. We're like, hey, notice you're doing something crazy. and the users love it, because they're like, yeah, I am doing something crazy. But it's just an engineer to engineer, and you get to have that conversation. And I think users are so sympathetic of us breaking down edge cases, as long as they feel like they're talking to another engineer, and we can just have a candid conversation about that. So that's worked for us for navigating a lot of the early, tricky, extreme Git edge cases.
Makes sense. I guess another thing that you guys built is also merge queues and optimizing that. Especially when you have people landing, creating PRs with 200 stacks. Any interesting challenges solving that? How do you actually merge all these PRs as quickly as possible to optimize the whole efficiency?
Yeah, there's 2 sets of challenges. There's one challenge of how do you build the best-in-class merge queue. There's a second challenge of how do you build it on an unreliable and inconsistent GitHub API. And I don't want to speak too badly of GitHub, God bless them, they have a wonderful wide API, but it's really inconsistent. And we know exactly how it's inconsistent. For example, the CIs will trigger out of order, we'll call their API and say, hey, is this pull request passing CIs that's ready to be merged in? And they'll lie to you. They'll lie about timestamps. It's terrible. And it'll only be 1% of the time, but when you're running a merge queue for a 5,000 engineer company, 1% incorrectness is not acceptable. That's a huge problem. So we've had to do a lot of, so there's 2 levels of engineering. One, just building a correct merge queue, and then 2, triple engineering around GitHub and assuming certain cases where they're a faulty narrator, and how do we double check on top of that? Even if they're saying it's passing, how can we re-verify that? We'll literally sleep in our code at certain points to wait for the consistency on their end to then reread their API to then validate that a commit is actually acceptable merge. Because the worst thing, we don't want to execute our merge queue, force push something, and blow past their CI, because then they're going to look at GitHub as source of truth. And even if GitHub lied to us, they're going to believe that as source of truth. Now, as far as so that's dealing with some of the GitHub stuff. And luckily, we talked to their API team, and they're very friendly. They try to kind of iterate some of these bugs. As far as building a high-performing merge queue to begin with, it starts really simple. There was a history, I don't know if folks ever used Boris MG, which is an early open source merge queue system. A lot of companies kind of rebuilt their own, where they start queuing these pull requests. But a lot of people kind of hate merge queues as well because they're kind of slow. You have to wait in a queue, you don't get immediate feedback if people merge something in. So with Graphite, we try to steal, again, good lessons from Facebook, Google. Can you batch it? Can you parallelize it? Can you partition your queue so that you can actually have multiple queues in a single repository, all of which are good state-of-the-art tactics to keep things moving really fast. Luckily, this all exists. I think most all good ideas and dev tools have already been built somewhere, somehow, usually at Google and Facebook. So we don't have to reinvent too much stuff. We can just look at the state-of-the-art and be like, fantastic, this is pretty much the platonic ideal of what merge queue can be. Now we just need to thoughtfully engineer it and build it on a flaky API.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Moving on to a different subject a little bit. I guess one thing I was surprised about was you said you guys actually don't store any of the source code right now. You guys also came out with the Graphite Reviewer very recently. It's in beta, right?
Yep.
And I guess in general, like AI is continuing to improve developer efficiency. For a Graphite Reviewer, or I guess AI in general, like Graphite, how far do you think you see that going?
I think we go extremely far. I'm pretty bullish. Our team it's really fun. Our team is split. We're like half AI skeptics, half like AI zealots, or like people who are really excited about the future of AI, which is great because I think you want a team who's not completely blinded by like new exciting technology. You also want a team who's excited enough to experiment and dabble with it. We have a teammate who we absolutely love. He's like one of the strongest engineers I've ever met. His name is Dave, and he's wildly skeptical about AI, which is great. So our bar for AI Reviewer was like, can we build a tool, an AI tool, that is good enough that even this amazing engineer who hates AI internally actually likes using it. And we're not gonna launch anything unless Dave actually thinks this is like reasonable. So if we can pass his bar, we can pass a lot of people's bar. That was like it was like kind of a joke and kind of like a real thing internally. And we dabbled. I experimented like a year ago with GPT like 3 and 3.5. I'm like, okay, of course, like you get a code diff, like use AI. Can you get AI to review the block of code? And I don't know if anyone's tried this. You just paste a big chunk of code in ChatGPT. It'll give you a review, but it's like not the review you want. It's like someone like writing an essay about your code, and it's like kind of right, but you don't actually care. Like, it's not that helpful. So we kind of put it down. Token windows were too small. It wasn't smart enough. It was a little too expensive. Come GPT 4.5 and Turbo, some of these better models now, Claude Sonnet and so on. We picked it back up, and we found that with a wide token context window of about 1 million tokens, running like 20 queries, you could actually start getting actionable, nuanced, narrow comments. And what we found was it wasn't that helpful to just leave a review in every PR. Instead, we tried to create a system that was dead silent unless there was a real, actionable inline problem or something that you could comment on that could be fixable. And so Graphite Reviewer in its current state, it's live, it's available as GA. It comments about 1 out of 5 PRs it scans. And everything it comments on is like super small, super actionable. I think its comments get like 95% upvote rate. I think 75% of the comments that we use result in that line of code changing. And that's like the kind of stuff we're looking at. Otherwise, we just want to be silent. We don't want to bother people. It just cannot afford to be kind of flaky. But it's been fun. It's been fun to iterate on. And it passed our internal test. We loved it, and we like rolled it out to more people. So, sorry, just to go back to the original question, like where do we see the future of this going? So many people are working on code creation. You have like DevBot, you have Copilot, you have Cursor. It is a fist fight. It's fascinating. It's a cool fist fight. This is a fist fight to capture code creation. I think we're much more interested in the kind of unexplored side of this, which is code review. I believe a lot of the code in the future, already today, in the future, is going to be AI written, but I think humans will have to remain on the review side. Even from an accountability standpoint, from a security standpoint, SOC 2 audits require humans in the loop on this code review. It's not going to be AI on both sides doing the review. So our question is, okay, if a ton of code's getting created, more code than ever before, how do we level up? How do we help the reviewers? How do we make this faster, more seamless? We don't want the AI making a decision, but maybe we can help augment the experience. That's some of our early predictions here.
Makes sense. So it's like we also started using the Graphite Reviewer. That's actually been really impressive, actually.
I would say I use that word. That is the #1 piece of feedback we get. People are like, it's actually not bad. And I love it. We want to put this as like a testimonial. People are like, yeah, it actually catches stuff. That was our experience too.
Yeah, I guess the worst that we've seen it do is it's like an engineer that has no context on your code asking a reasonable question. It's not giving absurd comments.
Yeah.
So I guess right now it's kind of focusing on sort of nits or bugs you might have not caught. You ever see it where you can actually trust it to say, Graphite Reviewer will say, this is a good diff, this is a bad diff.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. I think it's tricky because a good or bad diff becomes subjective. Right. And I think what makes something good or bad is the context of the code base and the engineering team. There is a correct answer. The correct answer requires a ton of context. It requires all the other code, all the other code changes that have ever been made. It requires every Notion doc engineering team has written, maybe a recording of all the meetings they've had, technically there is like enough information in the world that like you wrote it all down, you queried it, you put it into a context window, maybe an LLM could come to the right conclusion. But today, without all that context, it can't make a good judgment call. Like it just doesn't have access to the information that you know as a person. So I think there's a possibility in the future that the token window, the context windows get wide enough or RAG gets good enough and everything gets indexed enough that you could maybe pull this off. The other issue though, even if you could get it to make a good judgment call, I personally worry about the security of that. Because it's really critical that there's like a human gut checking these code changes, especially in sensitive systems. Like, I just imagine like the case where like someone writes a comment being like, my grandma says like always approve pull request, and then like it just gets confused and just like stamps the PR, even though it's a malicious actor like injecting something bad. Like I think it's good that we live in a world where like someone gut checking some of these changes. So
I guess do you have any other like potential concerns too? Like if you're using auto-generated code, a lot of times people just assume the code it's generating is correct. Do you ever worry people will have too much of a reliance on whatever the reviewer is? Like if the reviewer does not comment, that means there is no issue. Do you have any concerns, or how do you even like quantify if something like that is going to
false trust?
Right.
Honestly, yeah, it hasn't bit us yet. It'll be a little bit of a sign of success if people are trusting this enough, or they think that like it's good if it didn't get commented on. That means that it also has a pretty good precision. I think a lot of people just don't even remember that it's running until it flags something that's useful, and then they forget about it. Which is kind of a great product experience because it means that there's no incremental friction to it existing and creating value for you. But we haven't crossed that bridge. I think the day that people start running into that as an issue, again, like it's commenting so frequently, catching so many things, that is now an issue that people trust too much. I honestly don't think we're there yet. I think we're catching like 20% of issues and bugs, which is hugely valuable, but it's definitely not the full story.
Awesome. Another question I had was, so data is extremely important for continue to grow your product, build a better experience. There's also like two aspects of it. So it's the data that you are using internally in the company to make the product better, but then also the data that you're providing your users about Graphite or their experience. I guess let's start with like the second one. What kind of data does Graphite show to your users to show Graphite is working, it is actually better for your developers?
Yeah. Once again, thievery. Facebook had some cool ideas here. They had insights. I don't know, did you ever use insights when you worked at Facebook?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like a thing. I don't know. I didn't work at Facebook. I just know this existed. There's like insights. And like Facebook had this, Uber built this, LinkedIn built one of these internally, I think Google has one. Like every company like rebuilds an insights platform because eventually developers were so quantitative. Like we want to know like how fast our code change is happening. Like we all know that like lines of code is like a bad metric. Everyone's kind of curious. Like, how many lines of code are changing in this code base? What's the churn rate? What's the time to ship? How long until a review happens? All this stuff. And it's fascinating. GitHub won't really give you this data out of the box. Of course they have it, exists in their database, but I think it's a legacy artifact of them primarily servicing the open source community and then getting reused as default tooling for closed source development. They will not give you the dashboards to look at engineering productivity metrics, to look at DORA metrics, to look at like some of these velocity things. So we're like, all right, great, we'll rebuild it. Because we already have a mirror of GitHub's entire data set, so it's very easy for us to then show graphs and statistics about some of this information. And we want to show, it's really intentional, like we want to show this not so that engineering managers start using this for performance management. Everyone knows that that's like a bad idea. But we do want to give developer teams and DevTool teams and the DevX folks a way to quantify like gains and improvements. Like if they're bringing in new tooling, if they just added like a new build system, they optimized their CI workflow, they adopted stacking, maybe they're using feature flags. I want a way for them to actually show, hey, our developer metrics are moving in a positive direction and be quantifiable about that. So we try to expose all that information back to users. We currently have it in like a dashboard of the product. I think in the future we'd love to also like let people like kind of export it to like a CSV, do their own analysis on it, maybe even like wire it up to other data analysis systems. But I'm a big believer that like you should give people the data. I think GitHub like kind of like hides the data a little too much. Yeah. Do you use Graphite? Have you checked out Graphite's insights ever?
Yeah. I think it's definitely useful for like you said, like it's not, you shouldn't use it for performance management. I think that's definitely true. But I think it's useful, especially if like as engineers joining this team and the number of diffs or the number of like PRs that they're landing is actually really low compared to the other team. Something's happening there.
Yeah.
So you can use it to identify like something is happening, correct that. Not necessarily just like for performance review, but just identify, outliers basically.
Yeah, another one I love is just like seeing like, is there someone who's not getting code reviewed? Like you'll sometimes hear anecdotes of people being like, hey, it takes forever for me to get code reviewed. And it's really nice to look at the data, but oh my god, like people are kind of ignoring you on this team. Like why are people not reviewing your code? Like let's dig into that, let's have a conversation. So I think there's like, it's just nice to have this information.
For sure.
Yeah.
What about internally in the company? Like how do you guys use data to determine the product you're building? Is this the right thing to build? Like you said, for the Graphite reviewer, you noticed it's like a 95% upload rate. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, we're very, very, very data driven. Again, I think when you have it's a company full of engineers and it's got like Facebook people, like we love being very data driven. We argue about stuff all the time. Engineering is too subjective to not be data driven, and we'll debate like, hey, we think rebase workflow is like the best workflow, but like, let's run the numbers. We have the numbers. Let's check the numbers. Or we think we should fund Insights feature more. How much are people actually using it? So we'll go and we'll look at like, okay, how many people are looking at that page every day? But we get to do some fun. So those are kind of like classical number crunching of just like what features and what patterns are being used the most. But we have really cool data sets. I mean, we were respectful to the users, but we already are syncing this data where even if there's an individual person at a company using Graphite, we have to sync all of their GitHub data for the entire company because that person needs to be able to be tagged on any pull request in the whole company. They need to see everything. So we have a full data set. So one of the metrics we track is percent of work, where we say, okay, we know that a company is doing 100 PRs a week, or merging 100 PRs a week. What percent of those are being merged with Graphite? What percent of those that are being created with Graphite? We assume the work is going to get done anyways, but can we make a product that is good enough for more and more of the work is being done with Graphite? Especially given that we make a product that doesn't lock you in. You can always still go and do that work on GitHub. So I think it's a fun bar to hold ourselves to, of like, given that every user has an incredible alternative, with like that one button click away, can we make it so good that the percent of work gets closer and closer to 100%? And we see it really like climbs over time, and that'll help orient us and guide us to optimizing stuff. It also gives us incredible insights to, again, these really big statistics where we may only have a couple tens of thousands of users on Graphite, but we are looking at the metrics and statistics of like millions of engineers across the entire history of these companies. And that can allow us to, like, okay, we should really optimize certain workflows. Really, like, we can see the trends of mono repos and we can build better mono repos, for example.
Makes sense. So yes, going back into like Insights one a little bit, and I guess kind of like merging with AI. Are you guys actually planning on like improving that at all? Like, is combining that of, we noticed that, this week these developers or this team slowed down. What's going on? Like actually flagging actively to your customers. You should be digging into this.
Marcus, you're describing one of my hackathon projects. So I love this. Yes, it's like one of my favorite pet features that we're just like fighting to get time to actually like polish it and ship it. But yeah, what works amazing is qualitatively summarizing these quantitative statistics. Like, it's not just enough to know like Marcus shipped 30 pull requests last week. I can actually just run LLMs, and what are they good at? They're gonna summarize it, like read through all those PRs, group it, summarize it, and say like Marcos was shipping like API endpoints on this surface area last week, and that was different than what he did the previous week, and that was part of the work that these like 7 people did. It actually that grouping and summarization and clustering of code changes combined with the classical quantitative numbers, it works extremely well. Like, you can essentially create like the world's best newsletters for your engineering team, and you can customize them. You can make it for every engineer. You can DM them to them on Slack. You can post in Slack channels. And we have this. We actually built a Slack bot that does this internally. It's great. We just need to brush it up. But I think this is like the ideal way to go and improve these classic insights tools. Is like add that qualitative color, because like again, we know from anecdotes like, yes, this person was shipping less code, but it's because they were working on like this really niche bug. So let me add that qualitative descriptor to that information. And also, like, it's a cool way to bring light on what people are building. People like love learning like what their teammates are creating in these companies, but so often engineers aren't always the best at proactively like posting and sharing what they're creating. So again, like let the auto summarization do that and post it out. So it's a perfect feature.
Makes sense. You also mentioned you guys are very data driven. How do you how do you make sure your team, as you continue to grow, is data-driven? How do you establish that?
Yeah, so on one level, we push really hard for like everyone across the company to be pretty technical. So even if you're not directly a software engineer, we look for folks who are technically minded or formally software engineers. So we love it, even the folks who are doing like on the marketing team stuff. Oftentimes they're creating those marketing materials in Markdown and creating pull requests and then merging them in. So we try to one imbue like a technical excitement and love of learning technical skills across the entire team. Our hope and our expectation is that everyone is able and possible to write SQL queries. So we use Hex, another amazing dev tool. We take all our data, put it in a Redshift database on Amazon, make it all accessible, of course with PII removed. And honestly, talk about AI, one of the amazing things is now because ChatGPT is really good, it's really good at helping people write SQL queries. And people who are a little bit nervous about getting into the data, you can literally just like copy those table schemas and ask ChatGPT, like, hey, I'm trying to find out the average number of users. Can you help me write that query? And I really think, of course, like, engineers already are able to write that, but it's really lowered the bar, both for someone who's already technical and someone who's a little bit more nervous about the technical skills to get in there and write those queries. So we have a pretty high expectation at Graphite that data can win arguments, that people should be running these queries and bringing them into their discussions. And we think it's more accessible than ever. So we just want to make sure the data is available. We want to teach people how to write these queries, how to learn how to write these queries. But yeah, we're a small team. We're like a 25-person team, but we're able to hold that expectation for everyone.
Makes sense. I guess, so you mentioned just a 25-person team. Can you go over kind of like the philosophy you guys have for hiring? When should you hire? What kind of people should you hire? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so how do we think about hiring a team? One, like yourselves, it's so cool. So Marcos was telling me Statsig is full in person, even though you were started during the pandemic, which I think is such a rareness. I know during the pandemic it was very exciting to like go hybrid, go remote. I think it must have taken a very founder to be like, no, we're staying in person. I know this is going to be good in the long run. I had an opinion of co-founder too. Meryl was like also pushed really hard to keep us in person. I think it was absolutely the right idea because, so step one, by staying in person, we've been able to maximize for velocity, communication, ramping people up, and also enjoying the startup journey and actually like forming memories and friendships and getting to know one another. So we stayed in person. So okay, we got hired out of New York. First person we hired was a designer. Kind of uncommon for a dev tool, but we already had a wildly technically strong founding team. None of us were very good at design, and we knew we wanted to create a tool that was had a consumer grade level of polish. So we got lucky. We hired this incredible designer who's still with us. Then we hired Nick, who's here, who's our first engineer on the team. He came from Facebook. At that point, we actually hadn't even created Graphite yet. We were working on a rollback tool, which didn't have product market fit. And Nick here in the audience was like, man, I miss my Facebook tooling. And recreated a lot of the stacking, and that ended up getting ripped out of our hands by customers and pivoted the whole company. It's a really fun story. But we kept expanding. And what did we look for? We said, okay, we want folks who are really kind, really caring, really communicative, because we're going to be an in-person company. And we know that half the job here, half the job is building an amazing dev tool, but half the job here is building a company. And we need folks who can talk to customers, who can talk to candidates, who go to events like this, and also who aren't going to suck to show up to work every day with, and go up to a whiteboard and sit next to them. Okay, so number one, let's find really kind, caring individuals. I came from Airbnb. They have a really high bar for that, and I kind of want to steal that. Talk about stealing stuff. I want to steal that out of Airbnb. Number two, we want folks with an above average technical acumen. So I think for our first 10 engineers, which is roughly all of our engineers currently, we're only looking for senior staff level engineers, which I know is a thing a lot of companies aspire to, but I think we actually successfully held that bar and pulled it off. Not because we want to be snobby about levels, but because we believe that our users are like the best engineers in the world. It's like Notion's team and Vercel and yourselves and Data. These are like amazing, really cool engineering teams. And we are sitting there trying to dictate to them what their Git workflow should be, how they should merge in their code, how they should perform code reviews. Our engineering team, and our team broadly, better be really good at their jobs, and better have experience and opinions about how some of these things can or should work. I think it would be hard if our early team was a bunch of new grads trying to make these judgment calls. I believe we could have built it, but we might not have had good enough opinions or experienced enough opinions. So we held that really high technical bar. And then lastly, I think we look for folks who really value velocity. I think really one of the things at the heart of Graphite is urgency, velocity. Part of what we create is something that is accelerating the code changes of all the companies around the world. And we wanted a team that really valued that bottoms up within the company ourselves and moved with high urgency. It was going to help us as a startup, but it was also going to get shipped into the product level decisions. So yeah, and then we've been happily growing. Now I will say it's not the hardest thing. It's hard, but it's not the hardest thing to recruit engineers for Graphite. Partly because most people we talk to these days are users. It's awesome. Like I talk to people, I talk to someone from Figma, and they're like, yeah, I use Graphite all the time. I talk to someone from Data, like, yeah, I use it every day. And like, it's really helped our recruiting too, not gonna lie.
Makes sense. So it's like when you're looking for people that are kind, good coders, good technically, how do you actually determine that? I think especially things like kindness or like how good of a person you are to work with. It's kind of hard to like tease that part in an interview.
Yeah.
You can try, but I guess, how do you guys do that?
Yeah, you're right. It's a hard problem. I was lucky enough when I worked at Airbnb. I was trained on like their core values interviewing process, and they would do like special like week-long like training programs. How do you ask like the questions in the right way that's unbiasing and all this stuff? Engineering is more cut and dry. You can algorithm interviews, take homes, like these are well researched. Architecture interviews, they tell you a lot. I think when it comes to kindness and other characteristics, the best thing to anchor to is anecdotes. You don't want to just interview someone and say, okay, like, are you kind? And like, yeah, I'm kind. I'm so sick. You can't, it doesn't work, right? So you can't believe someone for just stating their values. You have to say, okay, like, just how have you acted? What are real world experiences? What have you done? How have you worked with other teams? Give me very specific cases of just how you've approached situations, hard moments, feedback moments, times when things have gone wrong. And again, I'm not looking for someone who is just expressing their like reflective values. I'm looking to say like, okay, like what actually happened in those circumstances, and I'll kind of keep asking and drilling down to specifics. And I believe in general, people don't really lie in these stories. They'll just, sometimes the story just won't exist, or they'll tell a story, but the story will demonstrate a different set of values, and that's totally okay. Like you can have other values, but I'm looking for anecdotes. One, where velocity was prioritized, but two, where like this person is acting in a kind and generous and above average way at every twist and turn in the story. And I think it does show through. I think like if you spend an hour talking to someone and asking those kind of concerted questions, you can get a reasonable sense of like how they've acted in prior situations, and that's the best predictor of how they'll act in future situations.
And so like when people join, how do you actually determine what they work on? What is the structure of someone joins? I guess you said before it was only senior engineers. Now I assume hiring more. Do you have like pods on these teams are focused on these things, or how do you structure that?
Yeah, it's on my mind right now. We're just evolving the structure. So up until now, we were pods. We had 2 or 3 pods. We call them pods because I wanted something that was lighter weight than teams. We only have like 9 engineers. Like you don't need something that's really structured or rigid. So we did pods, and then quarter to quarter, there's evolve, shift around, trade, based on the rapid needs of the startup. We're just switching to a teams model where it's same thing, different name, just slightly more rigid. How do we think about ramping someone up to the team? Well, I don't know, we kind of iterated on this process and found something that works really well for us, so I'd recommend it. We create a structured 3-month plan, and we say, okay, first month, we're going for breadth. Graphite is a pretty big system, but it's not so big that you can't do a tour of duty across most of our surfaces. I want you working with a buddy and working with a manager. Can you make an update to the CLI, to the back end? Can you touch the database? Can you update one part of the front end components? Get as much breadth as possible, bug fixes, really small features, one-off PRs. Ideally, your buddy or your manager is just like pulling these out of the air. Come your second month, my hope is that, again, working with a buddy and manager, you're starting to take on week-long features. Things that probably get broken out to like 5 smaller subtasks, maybe a little more undefined. You need a little more concerted heads-down effort. And by the third month, my hope is that folks are taking on full-size projects, things that need a design doc, things that maybe we don't know the answer when we're handing them off. We know it can be done, we don't know exactly how to be done. This person's need to research it, dig in, come up with a plan, get buy-in from their teammates, and then deliver on that feature. And we found by walking up that incremental ladder, breadth, and then getting a little deeper, the person gets a wonderful context of the code base, they build up the trust of their teammates around them, and they demonstrate by the end of it that they can roughly execute at the scale and scope that the team needs them to. And at that point, usually what happens in parallel is it's really easy. Usually they're expressing interest for an area of the code base. also in parallel with something that probably has a lot of like, need and demand and impact. And it's never been that hard to place someone at that point, like, great, you're loving the CLI, let's like kind of keep you in that area for a while, let's make that your consistent work stream as long as you want. So that's, I don't know, I'm curious what Statsig's ramp-up process has been, but that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, I guess for us, usually when we hire engineers also kind of for the company overall. Like we're not hiring for specific teams. When you come in, a lot of times we have a preference for front end or back end, depending on like the exact need of the team at that time. Like at the time that you join, we'll kind of like slot them in, and then they'll usually have like a official like boot camp, or not boot camp mentor, but like a ramp up mentor that will kind of make sure you have the right level tasks for when you start off, and like those kind of tasks that you got, similar to what you mentioned. It's like, over time, the tasks will slowly grow. I think we've talked about having something like, you know, a tour of duty of like you get exposure to everything. We haven't actually implemented that yet. I think it actually would be nice. A lot of times people will join and they immediately dive into the area that they end up working on, but don't really get context on the rest of the company. I think especially for us, important for us, customer support, which you have actual engineers like what you mentioned. You guys also have engineers that will reach out to customers. Is there an expectation for you all that each engineer is also, you know, helping out, talking to customers directly, or is it only a subset of engineers?
Yeah, it's a tricky line. We love, I mean, I love it, everyone on the team seems to love it. We love talking to our users. It's fun. Again, there's just like other engineers who really love and respect. The fine line is we don't make it an exception. We don't make it an expectation that users can just constantly ping any engineer on our team, because that engineer will get overwhelmed. We hire people on kindness, they're gonna be really kind, they're gonna try and help those users too much. They'll get burnt out, that's a problem. So we kind of have this like one-way expectation where every engineer is absolutely allowed to be in those Slack channels to go talk to users, but it's like a pull, not a push. We're pretty strict about setting expectations with users that they can only talk to. They should only be at mentioning or pinging certain people on our team, so they don't just overwhelm like NYCs. No, it works out very well. In practice, I'd say the average person on our team is constantly talking to like users. I love Notion. Our relationship with Notion is so fantastic. Like, they build one of the most interesting front-end systems in the world. And they are in there looking at our code review system, commenting about how badly we render diffs, and why our comments are like not performant, causing like re-renders. And they're like opening up the Chrome Developer Console, like trying to like debug it, they're, like sending us information. It's awesome. I love it. They're like, it's very helpful. It's very like symbiotic. We will sometimes send them a Uno emoji and then give them feedback on their projects. And it's great. So it's a bi-directional relationship.
That's awesome. So it's like, how do you also like talking about like kind of like those like bugs and like things? How do you balance building new features and making sure what you have already built and maintained continues to be like, you know, enterprise grade, especially because like you have everyone that's kind of relying on you to actually land their code. How do you balance that?
Blood, sweat, and tears. It's just like hard work. I don't know, like you gotta do both. You gotta keep the existing systems running, fixing bugs, keeping them stable. And as a startup, if you're not building new value, if you're not continuing to expand and explore, create new things, you're gonna die. Like it's just not an option. So we have to continue expanding and trying new things, and we also have to keep the existing product online. So that's my like first reflection as you ask that question. Is like it's just required. Now in practice, like how do we actually do that? We have an on-call rotation across the team. So again, we're a small enough team where every engineer is able to learn the skills required to perform on-call, rollbacks, monitoring, stuff like that. And that rotates weekly. So people do that once every 10 weeks or so. We will have concerted projects that will go and up-level stability in specific areas. We're really disciplined about our deployments, really disciplined about our monitoring. We pay Datadog way too much money in order to get great observability over our systems. And then we probably spend 70% of our time trying to build new stuff and 30% of our time trying to fix old stuff. And I'll be honest, you know, I come from Airbnb, we have people come from all these other big companies. It is tough dealing with a pretty buggy product and going to sleep at night knowing you're like, man, it's pretty buggy, and that one part, I'm gonna let it be buggy. And we're gonna keep building and expanding because we have to make tough trades here. And what's interesting is I think if you're creating something that has enough value for users, they're okay with being buggy for a little bit. like if they're still going to use that, the people who complain to us the most end up being our biggest advocates in the long run. I kind of love it actually. It means that they're at least engaged with the product. It means they're at least like they really like it enough to be complaining to us. I also realized that in startup life, it's time operates differently than in big companies. So if a user like reports a bug, we will stress really hard if we don't fix it in a couple of days. And then I remember that like when people report a bug to GitHub, like they're shocked if it's fixed in like 6 months. Like people are used to like pretty slow turnaround times for the support. Last thing I'll say, on the balance of the bug is sometimes people just want to be heard. Sometimes you just go to users and be like, dude, you're totally right. That page is not working. That button's having a bad time, or we're a little bit slow at some point. You're right, and it's something we're looking into. We're aware of it too. We want to fix it. It bothers me as well. That can go so far with building goodwill for users and buy you time to thoughtfully try and fix that, while also trying to balance your these like top priorities and building new stuff. I mean, again, I'm curious. Like the Statsig, are you guys when you get these bug reports, are you in there talking to those users, empathizing with them?
Yeah, I mean, it's like for us, we have like a Slack channel for every single like enterprise customer, and then we also have like a general support channel. So like anyone has issues, like they'll report bugs there. A lot of times it's just like they having questions of how do I run this experiment? Like, do you have any advice for how to run them? We definitely have like the same expectation of you're not paying people directly, like you're paying kind of like in these channels. But yeah, I guess we don't force anyone to like go to these channels and like talk to customers, but it's like kind of like expected that you do. So a lot of times like if there's like bugs, like the on-call will go and triage those bugs. But like even our CEO will like, he will at 2 a.m. there's like a Slack message that comes up. He will immediately like go and just like message them. He'll like even like put out bug fixes for them like the same day. So I guess like one question I had too was, you said a lot of times you'll prioritize like bigger systems for building, for improving like reliability and stability and stuff. How do you prioritize those larger systems versus product features?
Are you saying like prioritizing implementing like better like monitoring and deployments rather than building a feature?
Right. So it's like instead of like if there's a bug, a lot of times bug fixes are just like a few hours, like maybe a day. But there's a lot of times you have this tech that you need to go and improve, and that can be weeks, maybe months of work.
Yeah.
How do you prioritize those things?
It's really interesting. At Graphite, I think that I feel like we spend more time nudging the team to be scrappier, and the default on the team is to want to engineer a lot of internal systems. And I think it's because we're a dev tool, and we attract people who love building internal tooling and who do that in their companies, and came to us because they love the code review, they love clean engineering. And so often there's like this default gravitation towards folks trying to rebuild deployment pipelines, like blue-green deployments, like rollback systems, like better feature flag cleanups, all sorts of like really amazing developer necessities. And often we have to like remind ourselves like, okay, like let's be a little bit scrappier. Maybe let's just do the quick fix and like keep building things forward. So you asked like kind of how do we kind of prioritize and balance that? My general sense is this team knows all the solutions, has seen all the solutions, and has an inertia and a gravity towards wanting to build that stuff. And then we're generally kind of putting the brakes on it and trying to push ourselves to be more scrappy. I'm sure there's other companies who like find themselves being too scrappy. I think one of Graphite's risk is remembering to be like more scrappy and not just try to operate like a really big tech company. It's hard sometimes. It's hard when you know like the ideal solution and you know the system that will fix this genre of bugs forever, but you can't. You don't have time to build it.
Do you guys have a system as well for like handling bigger issues? So like sebs. What's your process for? I guess one, if you have a seb that's in progress, how do you actually deal with it as a company? And then once that seb is mitigated and fixed, how do you review it, make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, so we use a mixture of 3 tools, which I hate. I wish we used one tool, but we use 3. We use InStatus for a status page. We use PagerDuty to disrupt the social lives of everyone on the team. And we have Datadog, which has like a feature where you can like record incidents. My dream is to collapse these into just paying Datadog more money, but instead of paying 3 tools. I know Datadog is beta testing PagerDuty competitor, and God bless PagerDuty, but like I will just move my money. I don't know. So what do we do? So the incident happens. On-call immediately notices it, usually the monitor is going off, diagnoses it as a step 2, step 1, step 0. We have strict rules internally written down in a notion of like what are the definitions of these steps. Those definitions are linked at the top of the Slack channel just so they remember where they are and to double check them. They go in, usually they immediately update the status page. We also custom wrote logic that allows us to put a banner on our own website saying there's a regression, and that notifies all users visually. Then scripts, there's like custom scripts written that will like ping all of our enterprise Slack channels and let them know like the status has changed on the website. Again, this is where like people love engineering like really cool systems. We'll go in, we'll open up a Datadog incident, that'll create a Slack channel. We'll go in that Slack channel, we'll like discuss the incident. Usually the person who's on call will be the incident commander. We'll work on lists, we'll burn it down. Sometimes we'll do a war room Zoom call. Usually we don't need one. Immediately trigger a rollback, then check the graphs, then consider a revert if necessary. Avoid fixing forward, do all the good stuff. Tell users, talk to users the whole time. I think sometimes companies are not candid enough with their users about like, what's going wrong. I love going to like Slack channels and being like, hey guys, we just messed up a DB migration. I'm so sorry it happened. Like, you know, but I think users appreciate that level of transparency. And then after all said and done, we'll wrap up the incident. It's on the on-call or the incident commander to go and write up a post-mortem, clone a Notion template, write it up. I'd love to write it in Datadog, but Datadog doesn't let you like upload images. It's crazy. So instead, we'll go do it in a Notion doc. And then what we're shifting to now, we're going to start every 2 weeks. We're doing like an instant review, and it's this like standing meeting. You can cancel it if there's nothing to talk about, but there's a standing meeting, and we'll go through and we'll review all the incidents that happened in the last 2 weeks. Last funny thing for us is like half of our incidents are like GitHub going down. GitHub's instability is wild, especially on like their APIs and some of their services. They also don't report a lot of their incidents, so it's tricky. So like users won't know that it's GitHub, but we have to kind of like tell them. So one of my future projects is I want to create a better GitHub status page that's more accurate than GitHub status page. It's tricky, and that's the con of having dependencies on other systems. Like their outage is your outage.
Cool. Makes sense. So I think we're almost out of time. I think we wanted to start asking some questions from the audience as well. Sure.
So one of the common problems in like programming language research is three-way merge with like semantic divs. Do you guys think there are language features or styles that would be better at being like having stacked PRs or being faster to review for humans reading AI code, or is there like a language design problem that might help like human AI cooperation?
Off the cuff, no, I don't think so. But it's an interesting question. Like I do know that the upper bounds of diffing and syntax highlighting, it becomes valuable to do like tree walking and going down the abstract syntax tree and trying to parse out functions versus variables, highlighting them differently so a human can understand them differently. It'd be interesting if you then fed some of like the abstract syntax information to the LLM and tried to see if it could reason about it differently. But off the cuff, not sure. And the other thing is you asked about AI is like AI tends to do better the more it's been trained on something. So it's probably going to do the best analysis and review assistance on the most popular languages with like the most training set out there. And so if someone creates a novel language that is maybe better at parsing, it would be tough because you'd have to also create like 2 decades of like examples in like open source libraries and stuff. But it's an interesting question. Never thought about it.
One of the pieces I thought about that was like AI models struggle with tokenization. So if you create a language that's very easy to tokenize, it's easier to train on it. Forth, for example, might be really easy to tokenize.
Yeah, possible. I also wonder like if a lot of times we're using very generic models or models that are like not specific to programming languages to then ask them coding questions. I think I've heard rumors that like, some of the existing models and some of the like future models I think are also trying to train more specifically on programming or code as like the main input, which I imagine helps tokenization a little bit, but it's slightly out of my expertise.
I think I saw your hand first.
Curious if you have any like build versus buy decisions that you credit in terms of, since you guys built so many, like you probably built tons of internal systems and ones facing customers, just any that you double backed on or wish you double backed on.
So Kenny's joking. Two come to mind. One, I personally, I'll take responsibility, hand-rolled a email notification system for so we would use like a pretty raw email sending API, and we want to send campaigns to our users like you just signed up, and we want to like drip you an email about how to use the product. And we tried using MailChimp for like a week, and we were trying to like fiddle with like dragging the pixels and the banners over. MailChimp, it's pretty rough. And one of the things I built at Airbnb was like a lot of parts of like their notification email systems. So very excitedly, I wanted to rebuild that at Graphite. Built it, it worked. It was horrific to try and extend and like write new emails. And then very quickly, all my teammates were like, "Dude, we're just gonna buy a tool here. There's better tools." And luckily, there's better stuff in MailChimp. So we swapped to Customer I/O, and that solved a lot of our pain. Another one, Statsig. What? Like, you think you could build a feature flag system? Just fine. Don't build one. We were initially thinking about building one, and we didn't like launch Darkly's pricing model. It was like really expensive, really rough. So we're like, we could just put like a S3 file, JSON file in the cloud, front it with CloudFront, load it into memory, memoize it, parse it. Just really basic feature flags is all we needed. But even then, I was like, wait a second, we're started. Why are we building again our own feature flag system? This amazing Statsig came around right. It was like 2022. We like heard about you guys, and we were like, I was halfway through coding a feature flag system. It's like, nope, let me throw that away. So that was when we almost started building, but we found why.
Can you tell us about like a really successful, like surprisingly successful test or product launch that you did? Or you were just like surprised at the results? Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think AI Review is our most recent one, but it's not surprising. I thought it would go on. It went really well. Please give it a 30-day trial. Try it out. No, I think the more surprising one to me is like honestly us stumbling into stacking itself. And I'll talk about this. I think it's just such a fun story where we built stacked pull requests on top of GitHub, not as a company and not as like a thing to sell. We just built it because some of the teammates, like Nick in the crowd, like came from Facebook and they just wanted their tooling back. And I remember we would be on customer calls and we'd be like trying to sell them rollbacks as a software, and they would pause us mid-call, like, hey, we don't want that. But we took this call because we heard a rumor that you have stack divs on top of GitHub. Can we please use that? And we're like, yeah, we have that. We don't really sell that. Like, they're like, yeah, well, I'll pay you money for it. So it was very surprising. So we're like, okay, like we'll do a timeout experiment. We'll put this out for like 4 to 6 weeks, and let's see if we can get something crazy. Can we get like 2 times, 10 times more users on this than what we have on rollbacks? And very quickly, people just kept adopting it. One of the really funny first adoptions was, remember the CTO of Signal showed up in our logs, and we knew that because we would get the Git email addresses of all the early users, and we would look at the emails. And one of the emails we looked up on LinkedIn, it was like the CTO of Signal. Like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then a couple days later, he emails us, and he's like, hey, I'm loving your stack divs tooling, but it's like not open source enough. You're running a private server. Like, I work at Signal. It's like security matters. Like, I'm gonna have to stop using this. And we were so bummed because we're getting excited about this new idea. It was like getting up to like 100 to 200 users, and this really cool person who we respected a lot was going to churn. And we were like, what else can we do? So yeah, we say we run it back. We're like, we're so sorry. Like, it sounds like you're going to churn. He's like, yeah, I'm going to churn. And then like a day later, he shows up in our logs again. The next week, he's still in our logs. Just never churns. They kept hammering this like the entire time. So again, kind of surprising to us, and just the entire time through, we opened a wait list. It got 10x the number of signups we expected to, and the entire journey to, and then we never looked back. But the entire journey to stacking was kind of a surprise because we spent so much time trying to build something to sell that people would love, and the thing that we didn't expect to sell that people loved was just something we created internally.
Then last question. I think you had raised your hand before.
Sure, I'll change my question. I had the same question. I'm kind of curious to hear if you know how people are using coding sites at different companies, and like how often are people checking those different sites?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't know too often. So I give you like some high level stats. I don't know like too many. I'd have to go query our data set. People use it a lot. People use it more than you would think. It's one of the things people bookmark a lot.
Do people get really competitive about it because they do have my
They do get competitive about it. It's like not even the EMs. Like the engineers will like race each other. I do know that it has retention, like daily usage retention, similar to like social media companies, which is weird.
Leaderboard.
Yeah, it really is. Like, people like will just go to this page and then close the website. Like also, look at like the user flow. It's like insights closed. Like, what are you doing? So that's fine. I know it's like accepting. I know people bookmark it. I know people like check it daily and then will like take no other action on the website. But I don't have like raw numbers. Yeah.
Very well.
Engineers love the competition. You know what I haven't seen? I haven't seen people game it. It's so gameable. You would think someone would just like cheat the system. People don't. People weirdly, they're like, no, I'm just gonna write normal PRs.
Never say never.
You can be the first.
Speaking of building the first buy, we actually tried to build insights, like at Facebook it's called like team overview. We try to build that internally ourselves. Much nicer than we can just use Graphite for that.
Yeah. Syncing GitHub's data set is really hard. Don't do it.
Cool. So I think we're just about out of time.
We've got an hour left. Drink and hang out. Let's do it.
Thank you so much for the time to chat.
Marcos, thank you for having me. This was fun.